Welcome to the Construction Pals podcast, brought to you by BlueTape, your source for the latest in the construction world. Hard hats off, headphones on, and let's get started.
And I'm your host, Rick Butler from BlueTape. In today's episode, we're diverging from our usual topics of technology and financing in the construction industry to focus on a remarkable human interest story. Our guest today is Rich Walton, an award-winning 30-year veteran of the architectural design business, who found himself managing construction projects in Afghanistan for 4 years. In this episode, we talk about his experiences as well as the differences he sees in construction projects here and overseas. Welcome, Rich. Glad you're here, man.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you.
Afghanistan of all places, but before we go there and talk about architectural design business, what about you, man?
I grew up out here in Oregon. I live out in the farming community. I moved out here in the farming community from the city when we first got married because I wanted to raise my boys out in the country. As far as my background, other than that, my grandfather immigrated from Sweden. And so he was a tradesman. He did what they called pattern making. That's in the old days when they'd carve things out of wood and make forms and make things like wrenches and stuff like that. His father over in Sweden was a carpenter. And so that construction and that drafting type of thing has always been in our background. My grandfather went on to, in his later years, to teach at a trade school and try to pass on his talents as far as drafting and pattern making and actually working in a foundry to young men to be able to go out into trade school and work with that. I went to the University of Oregon here in Oregon. At that time, that was in the 60s and early 70s. And it was one of the only schools that offered architecture. So it was a great transition to go from a trade school to architecture since you're working with the trades. I had the benefit of being able to be exposed to all the trades, electrical, plumbing, carpentry, welding, all those type of things. And so when I went down to the University of Oregon, I graduated from there, and then I started up my own business for architectural design, and I did that for 30 years. And when I first got out of college, I wanted to be able to have more hands-on. So I actually went to who became eventually my father-in-law and told him I wanted to have some experience framing houses. And he says, well, I don't care what kind of degree or pencils you've been drawing. That doesn't do us any good out here. So I said, how about if I work for free? So I started my apprenticeship into the construction business on the home building part. Is I actually said, I'll work for free for you until you feel it's worthwhile to pay me. And so I think he used me like that for about maybe a month or 2 months like that before I started earning a little extra check for working on the job site.
So you came up the a lot of people would say the hard way, but I say the right way. You were so passionate about it, you were willing to do it for nothing. And that dates you and I probably a little bit, and just how you approached the whole thing. I admire that.
Well, and I also had, when I had employees that came out of college that came to work for me right out of college, I always offered them that opportunity because all my brother-in-laws are contractors and home builders. And I said, if you really want to learn the business so you know what you're actually drawing, I can get you a job working on the job site in the framing part for a year if you'd like. And so I actually had two employees that took me up on that and actually went out and worked for a year. And then after they did that, they came back and I hired them.
So let's speed up to, Afghanistan. So as I was saying in the introduction, this is something that, just very unique. You find yourself managing construction projects in Afghanistan for 4 years. Was that military related? Was that volunteer? Go to the genesis of how you got there.
Okay, so it wasn't anything I planned. I was the only one in my family who's never been in the military. I was in college during the Vietnam War. And my lottery number was low enough that I should have been drafted, but they told me to stay in college, and then they'd take me out after I graduated. And the way things worked out, they just didn't need me, so I never went in. I always felt a little guilty about that with my friends and stuff that went to Vietnam and came back. And I always felt like I should have given something towards it. So I had the opportunity to do that, and I took advantage of it. But it wasn't the opportunity that I wanted to go through. I went over there in the recession of 2008, and I had 10 employees working for me. My wife and I had this business for over 30 years. One of the employees was my son. And we even took a second mortgage out on our house trying to keep our business afloat. But all my contractors and clients couldn't get loans, and it was, a really tough situation for a recession. I always tell people that a recession is when your neighbors and friends are out of work. A depression is when you're out of work. And so after we burned through all the finances that we had, I had to lay everybody off, and I was going around trying to find work wherever I could. Knowing that I could pick up maybe a couple jobs here and there, but not enough to sustain us. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. I had 3 kids, had your dog, had a few other things, chickens and all that kind of stuff out here on the farm, and then we grow hay. But I couldn't find any work, and then finally the opportunity came through my son, who was at the U.S. Naval Academy with a contractor there, wanting to know if I wanted to go overseas and work overseas. Well, I thought he meant do drawings here and then email them over there, right? Send them over there in AutoCAD version or something like that. And so we went back east to meet him, and my wife was standing there talking to some other folks, and he says, "Is that your wife over there?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he says, "Can I talk to her?" Sure. So he walks over and says, "Do you have any problems with your husband going to Afghanistan?" And she just turns around and smiles and just kind of went, "No, I don't have any problems with that." I don't think she knew exactly what that entailed. But, with us, we thought about the war. I came home. I got the job. I came home, told my parents. My mom cried. My dad was kind of just, he said, "You didn't go to Vietnam and now you're volunteering to go to Afghanistan." He says, "What are you going to be doing?" I said, "Well, the president of the company told me to figure it out when I got over there." So with $300 in my pocket, a one-way ticket to Baghdad, because that's where the orientation was, in Baghdad, Iraq. I was there for like a month. But I hopped on a plane, got to Atlanta, Georgia, called my wife, said, "I don't know. Is this something I really want to do? I don't know where I'm going, who I'm going to see, what's going on. I've never been in the military." I just kind of took it on faith. And she's, "Oh, well, just, if you don't want to do it, quit and come on home." So make a long story short, I ended up going to Baghdad, living outside what they call the wire, off the base, not in the green zone. That took into whole consideration of a lot of different kinds of scenarios. And then when I got to Afghanistan, I had a general meet me there that looked like a warlord, and I had 2 Lebanese bodyguards, and they drove me to this little house with a little wall on it. And I said, "Well, where's the U.S. military base we'll be working out of?" And they go, "No, we live in this house." And so that began my adventure of working over there. To answer your question, Rick, about what I did, I went over there twice. The first time I was over there for like 3 or 4 months, and I worked for a contractor, but we bid on U.S. and other types of contracts to actually do the construction. The second time I went over there for the 3.5, 4 years, I actually was working for a contractor again, several of them. But what we did is we oversaw all the construction that was done. Basically, kind of checking to make sure stuff was built as according to what it was, or was even being built at all.
The first time you went over there, how old were you, if you don't mind me asking?
I was 58 years old.
Okay. And then sort of date this, was this after 9/11?
It would have been 2009.
2009. So to say the least, Baghdad and then Afghanistan, I think the first thing that, and I know that I would, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of listeners, A, danger, B, war torn. Were you ever in fear for your safety?
All the time, Rick. I was like a deer in headlights. I mean, even when I went to Iraq in Baghdad, I talk about it in my book. If people want to get more detail, I can find it. But when I was on the plane going down, we were landing. The flight attendant, she strapped herself in, looked really crazy and nervous. And I said, "What are you doing?" She's never been in Baghdad before. And I said, "No." And she says, "You never been through the corkscrew?" And I said, "No." And all of a sudden, the 727 just took this huge bank and just started swirling down like it was going to crash. And then just before it hit the ground, it kind of leveled out. And of course, there are people getting sick on the plane and all kinds of stuff. And I said, "What did we do that for?" And she says, "Well, it makes it harder for the terrorists to shoot at us." And so then when I got in the terminal, they pulled me aside and said my visa was no good. and pulled me away from all the people getting off the plane. And that was a whole fiasco. And then, make a long story short, they shook me down for half of the money that I brought with me. And but yeah, I was always scared. And within the first 2 weeks that I was in Afghanistan, I was standing out in my little yard. It was probably maybe 10 by 20 feet, not very big. We have these little concrete walls that went around it. If any of your friends or family or your listeners have been to like Mexico or some of those places, they've seen the similar things, or maybe some other countries. But it's a little masonry wall with a busted glass on top and that type of stuff to keep people from climbing over. Anyway, a car bomb went off, and just before that bomb went off, this Afghan general was telling me about how safe I was going to be. He was a big burly guy. I'm 6'1". He was probably 6'2". Probably 250 pounds or so, big black beard and everything. And he had a real rough voice, and he was basically a former warlord. You know, put on different hats over there, you know, to make money. And this bomb went off, car bomb, and all I remember was just being knocked over by the shock wave and feeling the heat go by me, blew all the little windows out inside my little house I was living in the village. And then the recurring shock wave, like you'd see in some of those atomic bomb shows, sucked the doors right off the house into the front yard.
Wow, that makes you second guess what you're doing for sure.
It did.
No kidding. So, to say the least, the construction projects, the differences had to be stark between what you were used to in the United States and there. What type of projects did you actually give some specifics of some of the more, popular construction projects you were actually asked to work on and complete and organize?
Okay, so there's kind of two basic lanes here. There was the military lane where I do stuff for the military. So I build them little bases and little things like that out there, little bases, all kinds of things that they would have, shooting ranges, anything that had to do with the military. Then there was a humanitarian side where I was out actually building schools. And one of the major things that I did over there was build girls' schools. For your listeners and other people need to understand that the Taliban don't let girls get educated over the age of 8 years old. And so at this time, since we weren't underneath Taliban rule, we were trying to get as many people over there educated as we possibly could. So I could do anything from a school, if you want to call it a school, that would maybe be 30 feet by 50 feet, made with just bricks baked out in the sunshine, to one of my biggest projects that I did was actually called the Herat University Girls Dormitory. And that was over in the city of Herat on the Iranian border. And the whole idea was that the farmers and country people could feel comfortable in sending their daughters to the university because they could stay in this complete compound that was huge. I mean, the building was like 50,000 square feet. So the huge spectrum on what kind of projects. Worked on little dams, worked on building all kinds of little roads, those type of things. Medical clinics, you could say they're a medical clinic, but for your listeners and you, it would basically just be a rectangle building.
Yeah.
And then keep in mind that 80% of the people over there, 80% cannot read or write.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell like the folks here at BlueTape that I work with and the folks that are sort of on my team, adjust and adapt. But adjust and adapt to us is a big nothing burger to compare to probably what you saw. But like relate to us what we see every day in the construction industry as a tradesman, for an example, a roofer, a brick mason, that you had to like go, wow, we're going to have to adjust and adapt to make this work. In other words, it's something that we take for granted in the trades here that you had to go, we have to look at a whole different way to figure this out.
Well, the first thing would be the materials. How do you get the materials? There's no yellow pages. There's no advertising. When you are in some of the villages of the cities, there's no street names. So first of all, that was a shock. Where do I get my brick? Where do I get my concrete? Where do I get my steel? Where do I get my wood, which is very little over there? So where would you get all these materials that you need to build this thing? And so what I actually had to do was drive around and find places that sold the concrete, the steel, all the materials, bolts, screws. Yeah, there is some possibilities in the bigger cities, maybe the three bigger cities, Kabul, Kandahar, and Herat, that I could have stuff sent over from Dubai on an airliner, but that would cost a ton of money, and the logistics of it is a nightmare in itself. And so when you start getting further and further out from these bigger cities, how do you get the materials? I always got a kick out of it when I had all the good idea, I call the good idea fairies, the engineers in the United States and architects would send me all these specs and drawings. And they'd say, okay, now on the concrete trucks, we want you to test every third load. And I'm standing there in the field with a guy with a shovel, and we're mixing it on the ground, the concrete, going, oh yeah, I'm going to get 3,000 PSI out of this thing. And so it was just like you were talking about, adapt. How do you get those materials out there? On the military bases, it was a little bit different. Like some of your listeners, and you probably heard of Bagram and some of those places. Yeah, we do have wood and materials and cement trucks in there. A lot of times our cement trucks were used as the mixer. We dumped the bags of cement in the mixer and in the drum of the cement truck, and that was how we mixed it up. But yeah, so I would say the major problem was getting materials out to the site. Also, other things you don't take into consideration. If I got a job that's a little bit remote, good chances the Taliban's going to stop my truck and take half the load. Basically, they'll say, "Hey, give us, this as a toll, or we're going to shoot everybody on the truck and destroy the truck."
Did that actually happen?
Oh yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's those are kind of logistics you just don't think about, and it took me about a year to finally understand all that type of thing over there. The way things are done, how the culture works, that type of thing.
In terms of, let's just say that you were a younger man when you were in Afghanistan. Let's say you were 35, but still had the same knowledge. And then you came back to really get into the bulk of your construction career. What's something you would have brought back to put into your own construction business?
And I would say probably the thing is listening to the different individuals. I was set so straight on so many different things over there. I've always been a fairly good listener, but I also went over there with kind of the attitude like, hey, I'm the architectural designer. I know engineering. I know all this type of stuff. I will actually help you to understand and build better things because I'm an American and I know what's best, right? So I had a bricklayer one time where I was explaining to him through my interpreter that, he needed to butter both all the way around the brick. They would just usually just put down a layer of mortar and stick a brick on it, layer of mortar and stick a brick on it. So I thought I explained myself perfectly clear. The next day I went out there, they're back laying it the same way as they were before. And I went, wow, didn't they understand what I was saying? Didn't they understand it? So we went over to the bricklayer and said, didn't you understand about this? And he pointed up the hill, and here's a giant Alexander the Great's castle built 3,000 years ago. And he told my interpreter to tell Mr. Rich that they're doing the bricks the same way that his forefathers laid the bricks for that castle up there, and it was still there. And how many of my buildings that I've done I think are going to be around in 3,000 years? I said, probably none. So I would think probably a lot of that would be, my grandfather did give me that kind of knowledge one time because he was a tradesman, and he always told me, if you want to have a ditch dug, don't go to the engineer, go to the man with the shovel. So I would say, listen to the tradesman and, understand, what's the best way to do it, because there's always a better way where somebody's tried it a couple different ways. One of the biggest complaints that I got here in the States when I was here practicing was, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You can draw pretty pictures on paper, but when you get out to the field, it doesn't really work. So I would suggest to people that are working here, whatever, always go out to the project. Ask the guys, how it went, and tell them, don't hold anything back. Tell me what I did right, what did I do wrong, so I can make a better project and make the job go a lot easier for you the next time we work together also, because my job is to get this thing done, whatever the vision might be, but in the most efficient and best way.
Yeah. I think that's, I think you nailed it. So what are you doing these days, Rich, in terms of, are you working in connection with the construction industry today, and still using some of these things?
What I did was when I came back, I won't go into all this stuff, but I was in a lot of different situations. I worked with the Navy SEALs, I worked with the Special Forces, so I was kind of out and about. And I also worked with a lot of different foreign countries. I worked with the Romanians and everybody over there. So I came back a little, disordered, if you want to call it that. And so when I came back, I was 70 years old. No, I was like 69 years old. And my two younger sisters were teachers. And they said, well, why don't you become a substitute teacher? And I said, well, I can't become a substitute teacher because my degree's in architecture and I got, a minor in business. And they go, no. In Oregon now, you can become a substitute teacher. So she says, I think you'd be good at it and you'd enjoy doing it. Well, I taught some classes before, but I didn't know anything about teaching full time. So I just jumped into it like I did when I went overseas and started in the middle school and working with them. And so I really enjoy it. There's days I have tough days, bad days, and the teachers say, you're always smiling, Rich. How come? And I says, well, I feel like if I can make the difference in one person's life, that's what's important to me. And so I will bring up the stuff about construction and the trades because the trades are really lacking right now. We need a lot of people. And so I'm always, before it was always, go to college, go to college, go to college. Well, that's not for everybody. And then it doesn't necessarily mean that you still can't have a fulfilling career. So I'll talk about college and architecture and engineering, and I'll tell the kids about math and science and different things like that. And I'll say, I think what they like the most about it is that what I bring to the table is practical use. A plus B equals C and all that type of thing. Yeah. But when I can actually say, here's how I used it in Afghanistan when people couldn't read or write. Here's how I had to make a building square by taking, a string and holding it to each corner, diagonally. And if they matched, then my building was square. I didn't have to measure it all the way around to make sure it was square. Every day I'll get asked, why do I ever have to learn this? Why? I'm never going to do this. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be that. And I said, well, life changes. I said, here's what happened to me. I was in the States and then I ended up overseas. So you never know what the future has for you. So that's what I'm doing right now. I don't really do any hands-on stuff as far as architecture. Sure, I'll have some contractors and family members and friends that'll come to me and say, hey, could you help me out with this project or something? But I don't go out actively, after it. I'm just mostly doing the teaching now.
Yeah, you mentioned, the trades are a little bit in trouble. And I would think a shortage of workers, is it folks aging out of the industry? They've just gotten too old to, be there and doing the day-to-day labor? Is it the professionalism of being a skilled craftsman? Or is it kids doing something else what do you think the reason for as you said, sort of the trades are in trouble a little bit? What do you think that reason is?
Well, I think some of it is, first of all, is a big push that we had when I was growing up was everybody was supposed to go to college. That was going to, be kind of the cure-all. And so the other thing is, I think for the lack of trade schools, the school I went to here in Portland, originally was an all-boys school. It was a public school, but it had all the trades in it. And as the years went by, the city of Portland started pulling the different shops and different things out of it. They pulled out the body and fender. They pulled out the painting booths. They pulled out the foundry and different things like that. Well, guess what Boeing and all these other companies need? They need a foundry to make their parts for their jets, and they need those kind of things. So then, of course, they had to start sending stuff off to shore, right, to have it done someplace else. So I think that's one of the reasons. I think there was a stigma before, about, well, if you're a tradesman, maybe, it's not as satisfying as doing something else. But now I think that it's changing. It's changing quite a bit. We're starting to get the high schools and stuff now to partnership with the different schools. In the little school district I'm out with now, they're partnering with Boeing on I call it CAD key, where you draw the stuff on the computer and then the machine cuts it all out, all the parts and stuff like that. So they're starting to get people. So they're taking that people that really like working on the computer, but it's also now being dovetailed into where it can be applied to a construction site. And there was an outfit in Portland, I don't know if they're still there, but they would actually pre-cut everything out of the whole house using the computer and the CAD keys, put it in containers and ship it to Alabama or Georgia or other places. So then when the container showed up, the people could build the whole house. The rafters were cut. Everything was cut out, So I think it's just getting people to the point where saying, here's another opportunity. If you don't want to go to college and you want to go to work and do something different, then you can, here's an option for you. And so I think that's part of it. And then, some people just don't like working outside, I guess. I don't know. It seems a little bit different on that, but
tell me if you think this statement's true or not. I read a headline about a week ago. For instance, my grandson is 6 years old. When his generation gets to be in the working world, that this next generation, the next boom millionaires are going to be tradesmen.
Yeah.
Why? There's going to be a shortage. And there's probably going to be a glut of IT and technology and working remotely and working behind a desk and white collar. But those guys that are out there working a true craft are going to be so rare that they're going to demand top dollar. You think that could be a true statement for this next generation of workers coming up?
Oh, for sure. I just had one of my friends that was mechanical guy, and I had a problem with my furnace. And he says, Rich, he says, first of all, just to show up at your doorstep, I got to charge you $167. So that's like for first half hour. He says, so let me walk you through it. Knowing that I had the experience I had, I'll tell you how to take the motor out, take it downtown, and have them, give you a new motor, bring it back, and put it in yourself. He said, I'll be glad to do it, but this is what I got to charge you for my company and my shop. And so I see that a lot. We have friends of ours that are head of the welding union over in Vancouver, Washington, and they start the guys out a very good salary with no knowledge at all, and to be welders. And so you look at any of the trades. Take your car into the shop right now and see what it costs. See what the rates are on the wall. For what the mechanics and stuff are making.
Absolutely.
So I think you're right.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
So let's go here to the final segment. We call it the BlueTape walkthrough. Just like builders do with a punch out list.
Right.
A lot of people get confused sometimes. They go, BlueTape. I go, yeah, like the punch out list. Put the piece of blue tape by the, the mark on the wall, the broken bone. So let's do this BlueTape walkthrough of this conversation. Let's look at a couple of things. What's the best piece of advice you could give anyone in the construction industry? Somebody that's out there working it right now, whether they're the builder, whether they're the architect, whether they're the tradesman. What's the best piece of advice you think you could give anyone?
Well, first piece of advice I would give somebody, if they're on the architecture and engineering side, is to get some hands-on personal experience, so you understand what the guys out there are going to have to deal with and go through, and how things actually go together. You don't know how many times I heard about, even from my peers, well, it worked on paper, and then you get it out to the field, and of course it doesn't. So I think that would be one of the things. If you can get that hands-on and get that communication, like you talked about, Rick, between the tradespeople and the people actually, doing the documentation and the drawings. For the tradesmen and those type of people, as get a good education and in the trades, and don't be afraid to have to move if you have to move to get a better job or better pay or better whatever it is to do. Sometimes we have to do things that maybe are a little out of our comfort zone, a little uncomfortable, but in order to move ahead of whatever that might mean, I think that that's something that you have to be aware of. And then for both cases is don't what goes around comes around. If you treat people nice, treat them kindly, it's going to eventually going to come around. And also, as my grandfather used to tell me, it's called work because that's what it is. It's work. So many times, especially if people are going into business for themselves, just realize that there's going to be a lot of hours that you're not going to get compensated for. I mean, you're going to be putting in, as when I owned my own business, I was working 70, 80 hours a week. That was just normal. And so I used to kid people about in the architecture and engineering business. You have two jobs. First, you have to go out and find the job and court people to actually use you. And then you got to come back and actually complete the job. So you work twice for the same paycheck. So I would just think go into whatever you're going into, whether it's the document creation or if the trades, of research it, find out what it's like, talk to people out there in the field or talk to them in the office, find out what you guys want to do. And if that's something you want to pursue.
Yep. That's good. Good advice. What's the worst piece of advice you've heard someone in the construction industry, that some you'd like to refute?
I don't want to work. I don't want to work Saturdays. I just want to work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Yeah. I guess that's kind of maybe So where's my vacation? Don't go out for a job and first ask them how many weeks of vacation you get and what are all the benefits and things like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't even think maybe things have changed, but I came up in interviews not even asking about salary.
Yeah,
they were going to bring it up before I was, and that's just the way that I grew up interviewing for jobs, not necessarily in the construction industry, but yeah, when you lead with, what do I have, no work on weekends, then that's not a good way to start. I appreciate you saying that. And I think people will glean, and overall, Rich, I think people are going to glean a lot from just hearing your experiences, and we're going to have in the show notes and how to get in touch with you and everything like that. So if people want to learn more, I think it'd be well worth listening to some of your wisdom. And but just a couple of things that I really gleaned that I want to tip my hat to you. Communication. We're not too good to listen to that guy that's toiling and laboring, and what's his feedback. That makes us better and makes the project better. So I appreciated that. And I think you used the word kindness. I think that's something that is rarely used in all walks of life. And I appreciate your tact in that also, my friend. But Rich, we're going to sign off, and we want to thank you. And we're certainly honored for you sharing your wisdom and what you've been able to do. I appreciate you.
I appreciate it. And if they want to go to my website, they can do that. And I do have a sample chapter on there, so they can kind of get a feel for what my writing style is, and take it if they want to go on further with it.
And again, tip of the hat, and adios, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time with me. I appreciate it, Rick.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes like this. For more information on Construction Pals Podcast and BlueTape, please visit BlueTape.com.